Hello everyone, Xanaro Gaming coming at y'all with another video, and in today's video I want to kind of give everyone an idea where I think a lot of the newer decks from the recent release in the Union Arena trading card game of One Punch Man. Yes, One Punch Man is finally here in the Union Arena card game, and I'm super excited about it. I think that this set offers a lot of really strong, solid decks. I do think that the creators of Union Arena are getting better and better at building good mechanics and sets. We saw with the Demon Slayer set being very competitive. We saw with the codegeass and the JJK set also being like a lot of like solid competitive decks. And I just wanted to give you guys an idea about where I think that a lot of the One Punch Man decks kind of fit in the landscape that is the meta for Union Arena, right? But before I really get into it, please leave this video a like. Please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. But let's hop into it. This is the tier list I made on Tierlistmaker. I have updated it to be post One Punch Man. I'll keep making these when every set comes out from now on to kind of keep you guys updated. This is where I had the meta sitting at before, One Punch Man came out. And I do want to go through this and maybe give my idea and update some of where I think these decks stand before we go through and add in the One Punch Man decks, right? I want to try to get a good format in all the card games I cover of trying to go back through, re-update this list, and then we can kind of get a better understanding where the meta's at, and then add these newer decks into the current meta. Going down into the need help, I do think that all of these decks right here definitely need some help. And to touch on that, we'll just go ahead and drop old Green Boy down here. I think he still needs a lot of help. I was being a little nicer with some of these decks just to make, we didn't have a ton of decks, so I kind of wanted to spread out what was going on a little bit more. And now that we have all these sets and we've not seen a lot of these decks played, I will say that all of these decks need to drop down for sure, being the green Britannia deck and the green bleach deck that revolves around homie right here. The other green bleach deck still doing very well, so it probably won't move, but let's just drop those down here. I do think, the rest of the decks sitting in here are really good, but obviously very, very wrong on some of these decks that I put here, right? I very much had some of these wrong, and to top it off, we're going to go with the Hashiras. I had Hashiras down here in like a tier 2 deck, and I was very, very wrong with that. I have been, proven wrong. When this set first came out, I didn't think the Hashiras would offer a whole lot. Now, this was 6 weeks ago now, 7 maybe even, that we're going on. And I think, Hashiras have proven they are a really good, solid deck. I think just a little bit more consistent and better than a rogue tier deck. So I will put it on, tier 1 decks where, like I said, these are tournament toppers up here, would be meta. Tier 1 this would be best deck in formats, which I probably should edit this. We'll go back through maybe and try to figure out how you guys like it better. But these are best decks in format, the full meta. Tier 1 will be like your tournament topper decks you'll definitely see in the tournaments. 1.5 will be your rogue tier decks, maybe can sneak in. And then 2 would be, good solid decks you could play, but maybe don't top in a lot of tournaments and such like that. But continuing to go through it, I do think that Muzan is also another deck I slept on. The deck is a lot more consistent and way faster than I thought it would be, right? Now, with that being said, I do think that since your opponent knows you have to get into the Muzan, it's maybe a little bit easier to play around. And I'll put it over here with Gojo in a deck like that, maybe a little bit above Gojo, just because the payoff to get into the Muzan is very, very consistent and really, really good. I do like it a lot. The Phantom Troop is still needing some help, but it is still like this tier 2 is decks that are full, fleshed out, solid decks, but just maybe, can't compete to where I think they probably won't get a tournament top. Whereas like some of these rogue decks, you can maybe expect 1 to sneak in, maybe 2 to sneak into the top 32, where I think this tier 2 are decks that won't be doing that. That being said, we'll keep, Union Arena doesn't have enough decks where I won't go over every of them, so we'll touch very sharply and quickly on every deck until we get to a point where I feel like there's way too many, like with my Digimon video. Check that one out for sure if you're into Digimon, where I go over it like this, but there's too many in Digimon for me to touch on. But I will touch on most of these. I do think that this is counting for the 2-cost purple codegeass, and it is a fun deck, solid deck, but it's just too slow. Really good. This is pizza deck. We'll keep it down here. It is a full fleshed out deck, but we'll probably put it on the bottom because we've not seen it do very much. I'm kind of disappointed with this deck a little bit. I love and believe in Tengen, and I do think that Tengen is a little bit better of a spot in the current metagame now because it is fast enough to steal some games from a lot of these One Punch Man decks that are coming out that are really, really strong. So what I think here, I think that this deck can move up to this rogue tier where you may see one or two kind of sneak into a top 32 for sure, because it provides a lot of pressure that could take out some of those decks. And I do think a couple of the One Punch Man decks will be very, very strong into the meta. Nobara, really, you know, this is just if you're making a deck based around Nobara. You could probably sneak into it, but we haven't seen that happen very much. I think that she plays better supporting the Gojo package. With that being said, I will drop her down into this. She's a fleshed out deck, but maybe needs a little help, but a little more fleshed out than needs help, right? I think that she is a deck you could build around, but let's throw her in the need help tier, because I do think that she is missing some things to make her own deck, whereas I think the Nobara package is a really good package you can throw into other yellow decks, so she's not really a full fleshed out deck on her own, so we'll put her down into the need help tier down here. Gon and Friends still can show up and steal some games from you every now and then, and like I said, some of these decks that are in this 1.5 tier, a lot of these are really aggressive decks that can, you know, put a lot of damage on your opponent, and I do think that Gon and Friends is still in a decent spot as a rogue tier deck, maybe sneak in the top every now and then, because like I said, a lot of these One Punch Man decks have a lot of build up and payoff, and a lot of these more aggressive decks will be sitting in a little bit better of a spot for sure. Going to the Bomber. Bomber stays here. Bomber still does some things. It definitely still needs some more port. But I do think that Bomber is still a really, really good deck. With that being said, I definitely slept on the 4 Swordsmen. I think they need a little bit more help. I'm dropping them all the way out of the rogue tier down to need more help, because I love this deck a lot and I do decently well with it. But I need to start taking my opinions out a little bit less on some of these, you know, more generic videos I try to do to give y'all a good idea. Whereas I think that if a lot of people played this deck, it would do a lot better in tournaments. But no one's taking the time to learn this deck. No one's taking the time, you know, to really put in a lot of work. And I do think that this deck, I'll put it, it doesn't need help. It's a full fleshed out deck. People just don't play it. And it's a solid deck, but I don't think it will sneak any tops, right? So I don't think it needs as much help as some of these other decks. Please build this deck. It's really, really cheap. Go into a tournament with it, and you'll see yourself having a lot of fun and being able to swing and catch your opponent off guard. But that being said, the deck needs a little help where it needs a little bit bigger of a in-game, which I'm not sure if it gets that in the upcoming codegeass set. But definitely something that is a little faster than these decks down here that could probably steal some wins. Going to everyone's favorite Shadow Boy. It's weird, right? If you see everything with this deck, you definitely pop off. But we haven't seen any toppings with it because I think a lot of people just prefer to play other decks. And I do think that Tengen is maybe a little bit better at doing what that deck does. So I'll put Tengen a little bit higher up than these decks because Tengen can really pop off pretty fast. And I'm actually going to put Tengen up here with the other Demon Slayer decks. That these 3 guys, depending on how you want to build them in red Demon Slayer, they all kind of do really strong swing at your opponent for fast damage, put a lot of pressure on the board, and I think, like I said, with some of these One Punch Man decks we're going to put in the top of the meta and in, you know, tournament toppers, these decks can steal games from those decks, so I think they all sit in a pretty decent mid-range rogue tier deck where they can pop off, but they just struggle to have maybe a little bit consistency to take on some of these, you know, meta tournament topper, top tier best deck in the format decks. That being said, I still believe in Green Bleach. I do think that he is super cool, really strong, to be able to tap down your opponent's board and do some really cool things. We just haven't seen it performing in tournaments as much, but I don't think that that doesn't mean that this deck can't still get some tops. I think we just need to see some of these players who build these decks and live by it really work on their matchups to find ways to get tops in the tournament. If I went based off of just performance, I think I would have to move this down to tier 2, and I probably will do that. I'll put it in the top of tier 2 along with the Gon, because we don't really see them topping it much, and I want to make these tiers a little more even to make it a little bit, you know, more easy to understand. And based off around that, I will put both of these down here now that I'm bringing it up and talking about it. But don't be surprised if these two, you know, still randomly sneak in. But I don't think that they're as consistent and haven't shown as much, you know, viability as some of these other decks to maybe do that. Going through Ghetto, same thing. If I went based off of performance in big tournaments. It's not that great, but I refuse to put this one down in the tier 2 decks because I do think that this deck has the power to randomly get a top here and there, and it's consistent enough, and it disrupts your opponent's board enough. And this guy is really, really good because, spoilers, he gets around the Saitamas because he makes you pick that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the ruling because your opponent chooses their characters. Please let me know in the comment if I'm wrong about this, but the way that I would see it is that your opponent has to get rid of their characters. Now, based off of Saitama, maybe that's not the way it's ruled, but either way, if it's not ruled that way or regardless, it's still a great way to get rid of some of their other characters like their king, right? Like, if they have to get rid of their king and you're forcing them to do that, then that really messes up their play. Which king is the most important card in the deck, and Geto being able to make your opponent, get rid of some of those cards will mess up their gameplay. And I really, really believe in Geto, and I want to see the Geto players please sound off in the comments. Say you're a Geto player. Say you're going to make Geto top in some tournaments. That way I look a little less like a fool. But I believe in this deck. I believe in the people who put a lot of time in this deck. It is really, really good. My boy Toto has not been performing. I love Toto. It's not had any tops. And with that being said, I think he goes down here right where Gone and Green Bleach go, where they're really good, consistent, strong decks. I think that it does really good with what it does. And I do think that, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it stays in the tier 2 because it does have a good match into the One-Punch-Man decks, which a lot of these decks are going to be eating well because a lot of people are going to be playing One-Punch-Man, and a lot of these, rogue tier decks here, I think, can do really well, and Toto does that, right? Being able to manipulate your opponent's front line and energy line, you can really mess up these big energy play decks that are in the One-Punch-Man, and if you mess that up, you might do really well. I will put it on the bottom end here. I will be trying to be one of the people that tries to make this work. Toto is definitely one of my top 5 favorite decks and characters. My favorite character from this show, but I think he needs to, get some performances, but we'll keep him at the bottom of the rogue tier. Gojo, I think Gojo and Muzan are perfect example decks that do the things that they do. They are both very, very unique decks. They both play in very different ways, where Muzan's trying to get a big payoff. Gojo puts down bodies that your opponent can't really answer, and hopefully you can double block out and find a way to outvalue your opponent. And I think that these two decks are very cool, consistent, what you want out of rogue tier decks that do something different than the meta decks. And if you have certain good matchups, then you can do well. Now, I don't think that either of these decks play very well into the One-Punch-Man, but they still play well into some of these other meta decks that are sitting here, right? We already moved the Hashiras up. They are really, really strong, definitely above these other decks. I will actually, switch it this way. Before we talk into that, let's talk into the Brother Sister Demon combo. We're going to drop them down into the Rogue tier deck, and they're going to be sitting right around here where Tengen and the other red Demon Slayer decks. All of these decks are, pushing the state of the game but don't have a huge payoff. But like I said, they'll be sitting really well to take some wins from these One-Punch-Man decks that maybe don't curve out as fast or don't see their, likely plays. And I think all these decks are sitting in a good spot to do pretty well into the One-Punch-Mans, but just not going to be a consistent tournament. I thought this would be the best deck, this and the Tanjiro from the Demon Slayer deck set, but we are seeing that the Tanjiro Nezuko deck is definitely the strongest one. And touching on that basis, I am throwing that up into the meta top tier decks. It has proven with the multiple tops and tournaments that it has been getting that it is the best deck from Demon Slayer. It is a meta deck, and you see that, right? There's always one or two decks from each set that are strong enough to be competing with the meta, and I think that's what Union Arena is trying to do, is give you, the one really, really strong deck, main character kind of energy decks, and, put them there for you to play with, and it's definitely the best one. Definitely a little bit more consistent to Hashiras. Touching on the Hashiras, I do think that they are going to be a consistent tournament topper deck. I think there'll always be at least one of this deck and one Ashford Academy, just based off of the ways they play. Hashiras are a toolbox deck. If you want to play a toolbox deck and have a little bit of everything at the access of you to do, you can tap things down. You can minus BP of your opponent's characters. You can blow stuff up. It does a little bit of everything, but you really have to, know this deck spend a lot of time with this deck, and it can pay you off based off around your playstyle. Whatever playstyle you want, I promise you, if you spend time building your own custom Hashira deck, you won't regret it, because the deck is very consistent, but it takes a good pilot and someone who loves the Hashiras. A really, really good archetype. I am glad to say that I was wrong about Hashiras when they came out. I thought the fact that it did too much of everything and not anything really, really strong would hurt it. But in this card game where there's so many different type of decks, right? Like Union Arena has so many decks that do so many different things. And I think that if you're a person who likes to do a little bit of everything and can master your build for Hashira deck, you can do really, really well. Ashford Academy is here because it always has a top. It's just such an aggressive deck. If they see they're curving out, it just does what these 4 decks here, the aggressive kind of like early swing aggro decks, it does what these decks do, but lower to the ground and faster, right? If you play against Ashford Academy, you really need to put out a 4K blocker. Even if, like, on your turn 3 you can't raid yet, but you have the energy to hard play the raid, you play that down because you need a 4K blocker to keep them from getting these 3K, 4K swings in at you at their whim. I think it's just the best aggro, low to the ground deck. With that being said, I am going to drop down the Rigi Rush around here because it has been getting less tops than both of these decks, right? Like, just Renji Rush alone is still going to be a tournament topper deck, but I do think that Ashford Academy does what Renji Rush does, but a little bit better in that aspect of being consistent, whereas Renji Rush, you can just get walled out, but you lose a lot of value, whereas the Ashford Academy still has steady value. I do think that these are great decks that you'll see on the cusp of top 16s for sure, and definitely going to see at least one in top 32s. We've touched on the Tanjiro. He is definitely, in the meta, one of the best decks in format BD. So strong. Such a cool, consistent deck. I'm glad to see that, you know, it is a good deck, and anyone that took the time into it is going to be rewarded. Bleach, Ichigo stays up there too. It's a meta, one of the best decks in format. I will say that Suzaku has been a little bit of a disappointment, and it hasn't had some of those more consistent toppings in the format. I don't want to put it down as low as some of these other decks, but I think I have to, because saying that, you know, it's one of the best decks in format, I don't think I can say that, because it doesn't always have, you know, multiple guaranteed tops in these tournaments that are coming up, only because it is a little bit slower, and sometimes you just don't see your mechs. And as much searching as consistency as the deck has, not seeing those mechs loses you the game, but you can also win games really, really fast. Now, with that being said, I do think it is the top of this tier of the decks, but I would not consider it one of the top, you know, 5 best decks in format. 5 to 8 is kind of where I really want to keep best decks in format, and then we're obviously putting a couple One Punch Man decks into place here, because I think they do what Suzaku does better in closing out the games, because Suzaku is still susceptible to, you know, you get all this payoff with the 8 drop, right? Say you get the swing in and now your opponent kills it, and maybe you've messed up your energy line and you don't have as much because you don't have the protection that One Punch Man has. So it struggles in that aspect a little bit. So I will move it down only because we're trying to make room. We want to keep this between, you know, essentially there'd be like 4. But I think 4 to 8 is a good spot to show you what the meta and best decks of the format are. With that being said, I would put Kurapika. I think it just edges out Suzaku because it does have ways to get around the king play, right? The king play that you can do in One Punch Man, Kurapika being able to snipe over the king on an earlier energy curve than Suzaku can by sidelining it. I think that that gives Kurapika a little bit more stability to stay in one of the best decks. I do think that, you know, if I had to organize these now, I'd put Ichigo a little behind Kurapika, and I would put Tanjiro above Kurapika because it's definitely a lot more faster and consistent of a stronger deck. But I do think that Kurapika fans can rejoice that, you know, it's all around. If you see your Kurapikas and you get to that play, you can put a lot of pressure on your opponent. And I think that, you know, having the impact now is really, really valuable going into these One Punch Man matchups, because if they try to block out, you're still getting these swings, and having the snipe and being able to control their kings on the board and having a way around that helps you out a ton, because you can really mess up those plays, and I think it can do that a little more consistently than Suzaku can, and I think that's why Ichigo edges is out too, because Ichigo can, you know, clear those bodies off the board and not let the One Punch Man ramp up as fast. And then Tanjiro just tries to win the game before they get there. That's all. I do think that the top 3 decks are definitely going to be these 3 kings, and I don't think that it changes even with One Punch Man spoilers. It is going to be a top deck, but I do think that codegeass and both the different versions of Blue JJK that you would like to build are all 3 the best decks in the format at the moment. Now, if I had, like, you know, to split this tier a little bit, these 3 decks would be the 3 best decks in the format, and everything else would just, you know, be part of the meta with it. And maybe if you guys want me to switch it that way, let me know. I want to find a format of doing these videos that you guys would like me, you know, to make it a little more clear. But these 3 decks are definitely the best decks in format for a reason. Purple code with all the triggers and consistency it has, and your opponent not being able to block you out. And then Nanami package for Blue JJK, just having that late game, super consistent, fill your trash payoff. And then just generic Blue JJK, doing what it does, bouncing cards, clearing cards, tapping cards down, returning cards to your hand. It does a little bit of everything. Those 3 are the best decks for sure. But now let's get to it. I know it's been 20 minutes now. We're finally talking about these One Punch Man decks. But here they all are. I'll try to, let's see if we can sort it. Yellow decks, red, green, a yellow deck, red. Really just the 2 green decks. I think that 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. These are the 10 like core decks you can build from this set in One Punch Man, which is nice to have, you know, around 6 to 10 decks per set that you can build. Now, granted, some of these cards do have overlap, and I have separated them to be a little bit more generic and unique, so that way I can really flush it out, because I want this to be a pretty comprehensive you know, this is like the meta, and then I also do the full comprehensive tier list that I will also do, including all these cards. But since One Punch Man just came out, I wanted to add these in here, all the decks, and the ones that are actually really good, I think we'll, you know, separate them out to do this tier list video. But starting off with my favorite deck is going to be the Sisters, and I do think that the Sisters are going to be a really cool rogue tier deck that you can run. I think that it's going to have a lot of, you know, cool things that it can do, but I don't know if the payoff is quite high enough. And if I really had to say it, I would put it down here in kind of this tier 2 strategy in Union Arena, where I do think that it has a nice solid core of what it wants to do, but I do think it's a little low to the ground. This is actually my favorite deck here, so I'm trying not to be biased with it. I do think that it's probably going to be a really good deck, but I don't think that the payoff is high enough. But I would like to be proven wrong with this. But regardless, you know, all these decks I put up here are all solid decks, right? Like, they're all fleshed out decks that you can run, these tier 2 decks, whereas I think the tier need help. You probably can't win your locals. I do think that you could show up with locals and play this deck really well. It deals around using a lot of events and abusing using events for free. Now, going into our Silver Fang deck, I do think that this one is a deck that needs a little more help. There are a lot of cards for Silver Fang and his, the older guy that's his partner. That's like deck that you can build based around these guys, but I don't think that the payoff is quite high enough with them, and it's a little bit slower, but it is a solid deck. But I do think that it would probably sit in this need help tier, and it wouldn't probably make it on when I do the, you know, comprehensive meta deck. It's really just a deck that you can build. It probably needs a little help with some maybe big payoff, which you may be able to supplement with Saitama, right? Like, I'd be love to be proven wrong with the Silver Fang deck, but I think it's just a decent built deck that just needs a little help. With that being said, I think we'll put the Speed O Sonic around that same level. I think that Nobara is probably better than both of these decks with what it can do, but both of these guys right here kind of push the pace of swinging the game, but they just don't have a ton of payoff. But you could probably still, you know, steal some games from your opponent. With that being said, let's go to I'm gonna skip over the Saitama decks because we know where those are going. Metal Bat is also another deck that you can build in the set that I think is a decent deck, and I do think that this one has a little bit more of a payoff than the Silver Fang and Speedo Sonic deck, because you can use some of the hero cards, and a lot of the hero cards have really good stats in this line, and I do think that it would probably sit around the same tier as the Toshiro Gone kind of deck packages, where they're solid decks, do some really cool things, and can maybe, you know, steal some games from your opponent. If I had to really, like, foreshadow this deck, I think that it would actually probably be a really good road tier deck, because this metal bat on a big body has nullify impact, and I think that that makes him a little bit more relevant in the metagame at the moment, being able to nullify the impact of some of these big cards and keep you alive. So with that being said, I'd probably switch him up here. I do think all these fast decks kind of need to stay here, and if I had to take one down to make it a little more even, it would probably have to be a Bomber. I would put him around here. Now that we're, you know, trying to make this a little bit more even, it's a really solid good deck that you can maybe win your locals with, but I don't think that it would probably sneak in any random tops at a big tournament, whereas all these decks from 1.5 up to the meta, all of these maybe C1, 1 or 2, and then majority of the meta, right? Just to make it a little more clear. Going to Boros. This one seems really cool. I don't know what I think about Boros yet. It does seem like he can do some cool things, and maybe the payoff isn't enough, but I think I'd sit him in the tier of the Yawatch kind of stuff. It kind of feels like that same kind of level of a deck where it can do some really cool things, but maybe just not enough to like consistently win some games in your local tournaments like that. It needs a little help, but that being said, like, it's still a good deck. Maybe you could steal some wins, but probably not win your locals, but maybe make somebody mad and upset. I would love to be wrong about the Boros. I do know 1 or 2 of the guys at our shop is going to build it, and I would love to see, you know, be wrong about this one for sure. But I do think it's a deck that probably needs some help. Going into the Monster Association deck, this is a really cool toolboxy deck too, in similar light as like Hashira's is, but I don't think that it's consistent enough and has enough payoff to where it could be a deck that you play like that, where I would be like, oh yeah, this is a tournament topper deck altogether, and I think it's just a lot worse than that, and it's not really a full fleshed out deck. You're kind of just playing some cool guys, and I would definitely probably put it at the bottom down here if you were just building just the straight Monster Association deck without the Garo, right? Like, Garo plays some Monster Association decks the way you would build it, but I do think that if you try to build just a straight Monster Association deck, it would be a deck that maybe needed a little bit help, feeling very reminiscent of what the Britannia deck kind of does for sure. Now, these are really the 4 decks in One Punch Man that everyone's going to want to build that are really, really cool. And if you want to build just a straight Genos deck, I do think that Genos is a really cool, solid deck that you can, you know, build and have fun with, and then, you know, just build it around Genos and some other good yellow cards. With that being said, though, I don't know about a tournament topper deck or, you know, doing anything crazy, but I do think a solid built deck that you can have some fun with, and maybe do some things at your locals, maybe win the locals with it. It does have some great double blocking power in it, but I think the situation of like wanting to play some Saitama cards with it as well kind of makes it a little less, where you would rather just play Saitama and then run your Genos and King packages in it, right? But if you wanted to build a straight Genos deck, you definitely can, and that's what this is representing, and I do think it's a solid, cool deck, really feeling a lot like Gone and Friends, to be honest. Like, a really cool deck that has some impact, some double blocking in it, and where Gone has like straight BP, it definitely has an identity and is a fleshed out archetype in a deck, but just maybe doesn't have that consistent punching power to make it, you know, consistently beat meta decks, which is what some of these decks in this 1.5 tier can do, where they can consistently have good matchups into some of these meta decks, which lets them sneak by some wins, whereas I think all these decks through here don't have as many good matchups, but if they were matched up against each other, and these down here, or even just 1.5s, they could do pretty well, but not into the meta. Okay, now going into it, I do think that Garo is going to be a tournament topper deck. I think that Garo is really, really strong. It is really consistent with some of the draw engine and cycling your sideline in it that it has. And it has a pretty big payoff with Garo being really, really strong. And you're just constantly building your sideline and getting bigger. And I think that it has a really good way of like constantly putting pressure on your opponent, where they're going to want to waste resources on your Garo. And it has one of the best option cards in the whole game. One of the event cards that keeps your Garo from being sidelined into life. So you're able to swing in with your Garos, sideline some of their characters, and now if they hit a special in life, you don't have to worry about it. You're safe. You're going to be really good. And with that being said, I do think it edges out, you know, Rinzi Rush and Academy, and it sits really strong here. I think if I had to reorganize this a little bit, like these 3 decks, Hashira, Suzaku, and Garo, I would imagine be like a, you know, rock, paper, scissors format where one beats one beats the other. But if I had to say so, I would think that maybe Garo is really, really strong and can push a lot of these meta decks into tight games, right? Consistently. So I would put it on the best of these, you know, tournament topper, looking outside, looking in of like a actual full meta best deck in format decks, but it is really, really strong, and I'm very excited to build it. I want to build the Sisters and the Garo deck. Those are two decks I want to build. I'm going to build my brother both of these Saitama decks, and spoiler, both of these Saitama decks are really, really, really strong, and I do think that they are going to impact the meta, right? I'm just putting them both here for an instance. There is a difference in these two decks. The green is more of a build-up payoff deck. If you see it, you win the game. If you get there, you get there. And I think the yellow is a little more consistent, a little bit, you know, faster, lower to the ground, be able to put out a lot of damage on your opponent. And I do think that the yellow one edges out the green one with how consistent it is, being able to, you know, put a lot of pressure. I will say that I think early on, green will probably perform a little better until people realize what they have to do. And if you take anything out of this video, know this: you kill the king. If king is on the field, you do everything you can to get rid of it, get it off the board, as long as you're not ruining your game. Because that king provides so much milling and consistency for the deck that you have to get rid of it. And this deck lives and dies by having that king out on the board. And if you get rid of it, it changes their whole game plan where they can't play this Saitama out as consistent. And with that being said, I do think that this Saitama can really lose out to some of these faster decks here with the Renji and the Academy Rush. And looking at the landscape, I don't know how Hashiras will play in it too much because they don't provide a ton of pressure, but I do think that Hashiras will have to run a little bit higher of the double attack package now that Saitama's out, so they can provide a little bit more pressure. I think that Suzaku being able to kill the king helps them out a little bit too if they see it, but I do not be surprised to see this deck, you know, getting more tops in some of these decks early on until everyone figures out how to play with it. But I'm also trying to, you know, give you guys some insight of what I also foresee, not just for the next week, but for the next, you know, month or two until the next set comes out, where I think this deck sits. And it's definitely going to be a consistent tournament topper, you know, in these tournaments, which is what these decks are. But I do think that you can play around this deck a lot better. But at the end of the day, too, if they just see everything and they go through on you with the Saitama, you do just lose the game. And with that pressure alone, this deck will always sit in this tier as a looming threat that every deck, both of these decks, every deck has to now play around these decks and find some way to play through them. And it is, you know, a big meta warper deck. Like, I would say, like, it warps the meta for the card game just as much as these top three decks, but I don't think that it will be as consistent in topping tournaments as those three decks, but it will be just as relevant. You have to be prepared to fight this deck for sure. It closes off. If you don't win against this deck and you can't consistently do it, you're not topping a tournament. This deck is so good. And with as much as I talked about this green version of the deck, the yellow version does a little bit similar of what that deck does, with not as much of a payoff, but with the same level of protection where you can't sideline the Saitamas, and then you're able to clear your opponent's board with your Saitamas, with a lot of the other characters. And I do think that, you know, talking about the Genos package in this Saitama deck is the star of the show, being able to keep you in the game and being able to slow your opponent down. And then these Saitamas come out a lot quicker than the green ones do, although not as powerful, but it is a more consistent deck and it is really, really good. And if I had to put it here, I would actually probably put this above Kurapika and Bleach, even though I think Kurapika has a little bit easier of a time, you know, getting through the Genos double blockers than Ichigo does. I think that, you know, One-Punch-Man is just so strong. This deck is going to be really, really good, and it is going to be here in the meta for sure for a long time. Both of these decks really, really good. Looking at it now, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So sitting around where we kind of want to be, having the, you know, 7 best decks in format, the meta. This is definitely the meta to prepare for. Tier 1 are also part of the meta, where these are some of the decks that just aren't quite as on the level as some of these, but definitely going to be tournament topper decks. The 1.5 are rogue tier decks. If you put the time into these decks, I do think that you have a really good spot to play into some of these meta decks and sneak out a couple random tops in big tournaments. And these tier 2 decks are just decks decks where I think they're solid decks, they do a lot of things, but maybe are just not topping any tournaments anytime soon. And then the bottom need help tier. None of these are going to be topping any tournaments that I foresee, and they need a little help, right? But please let me know what you guys think about this tier list video. I know this one was a doozy, but I really want to try to provide you guys with all the knowledge I have about this card game. I try to build as many decks as possible in all these sets because I want to give you guys all the knowledge I have, and this is my thoughts on what I think the current meta game and tier list of what One Piece or Union Arena decks are in the card game right now. But this is my list. Let me know what y'all think. Please share this list. Use this tier list maker to make your own list. And I will do the full comprehensive deck list video soon. But please let this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and I appreciate y'all hanging out with me for this doozy. Peace.